Welcome. The Honorable Carolyn Crenshaw, nominated to be a member of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Welcome. The Honorable Kristin Johnson to be Assistant Secretary of Financial Institutions, Department of Treasury. Welcome. And Mr. Gordon Ito to be a member of the Financial Stability Oversight Council to serve as the independent member with insurance expertise on FSOC. Mr. Ito, welcome. We thank the nominees for appearing today. I will make brief statements about each. I will swear each of you in, and I believe that Senator Warner has a statement, a brief statement he wants to make about one of the nominees. 3 nominees have already been confirmed unanimously. Ms. Goldsmith, Romero, Ms. Crenshaw, Ms. Johnson, all been confirmed unanimously by the Senate. I'm hopeful we get the same kind of bipartisan cooperation that we see in this committee oftentimes again. Ms. Goldsmith Romero has been confirmed by every member of the Senate multiple times. In a Washington far too divided, far too often, Republicans and Democrats on this committee and in the Senate, and I appreciate Ranking Member Scott's bipartisanship on these kinds of matters, have agreed that these nominees possess the experience and the character to serve the public. The nominees have received strong statements today of support and support letters from a broad swath of the financial sector, services sector, including consumer groups, former regulators, state insurance commissioners, on and on and on and on. These nominees bring with them years of experience and a strong dedication to public service. If confirmed, each will play an important role in the success and stability of our financial system. The President nominated Christy Goldsmith Romero to be a member and chairperson of the FDIC. As chair, she'll lead an agency responsible for protecting the bank accounts of millions of Americans across the country. Ms. Goldsmith Romero is a highly qualified nominee, more than 2 decades of financial services experience. She served as a commissioner in the Commodities Future Trading Commission since 2022, after she was, again, unanimously confirmed by the Senate. At the CFTC, she's worked to ensure market integrity and protect commodity end users and consumers. Prior to joining CFTC, spent 6 years at the SEC, where she served as counsel to SEC chairs Shapiro, a Democrat, and Cox, a Republican, during administrations of both parties. She served as Special Inspector General for TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program. She took on that post in 2009 amid the worst financial crisis since the Depression, where she did vital work protecting taxpayers. She served in several roles in the Inspector General's office at TARP before being unanimously confirmed by the Senate to serve as the Special Inspector General. She managed a large staff of examiners and accountants and auditors and other investigative professionals. As the Inspector General, she followed the facts where they led. She wore her independence proudly. She helped the office meet its mission, in the process recover literally billions of dollars from American taxpayers. During her decade as IG, she looked under the hood of many financially distressed banks and institutions. She knows how to spot signs of trouble. She knows what to look for when it comes to financial stability or instability or potential contagion. She understands regulation, the important role regulators play in ensuring the safety and soundness of financial institutions. She's proved that she will hold accountable those who engage in fraud and misconduct. Ms. Goldsmith Romero's nomination comes at a pivotal time. Everyone here today agrees the FDIC needs drastic cultural change. Longstanding issues of harassment and misconduct have plagued the agency for over a decade under multiple chairs of both parties. The women and men of the FDIC deserve a workplace free of harassment and misconduct. That's why I called weeks ago on the president to nominate a new, highly qualified chair, and Ms. Goldsmith Romero is that. Tough, fair, accomplished regulator, manager, track record of making sure bad behavior doesn't go unchecked. Listen to the people who've worked with her, the people who've seen her character up close. Christopher Cox, former Republican SEC chair, wrote the committee and said this: "She is a consummate professional. Her skill and objectivity are the reason she's worked successfully across multiple administrations of different parties. That high level of professionalism is reflected in the fact that she has twice been unanimously confirmed to her important financial regulatory positions." I believe that Senator Scott, I believe, as a House member, served with Congressman Cox, as I did, perhaps not, but I know they have been acquaintances and friends over the years. Not to speak for the ranking member, of course. Committee also received a letter of support from a group of bipartisan women who have spent decades working in financial services as congressional staff, federal agency staff, and industry representatives. Leadership starts at the top. She's the right choice to lead the agency as it charts a much-needed transformation of its culture. Congratulations on your nomination. The President's renominated Caroline Crenshaw to a full term on the Securities and Exchange Commission. She has joined the SEC board in 2020 after being nominated by President Trump, who was a Republican, and unanimously confirmed by the Senate. In her 4 years as a commissioner, or he is the Republican.
He's still Republican.
Okay, he's okay. As we all follow. In her 4 years as commissioner, Ms. Crenshaw has been a fierce advocate for protecting Americans' money and has routinely fought to make our markets more fair and more transparent. Prior to her confirmation for the SEC, she served as a career staff attorney at SEC as well as counsel to two commissioners. Prior to joining, Ms. Crenshaw worked in private law practice in Washington. In addition to her exemplary service to our country, Ms. Crenshaw is also an Army Reserve captain and the Judge Advocate General's Corps. Welcome back, Ms. Crenshaw. Thank you for your service. Nice to see you. President's nominated Kristin Johnson to serve as Assistant Secretary for Financial Institutions at the Department of the Treasury. The office Ms. Johnson would lead, if confirmed, handles a broad portfolio, including financial institution policy, insurance, cybersecurity, community economic development. She brings with her a wealth of experience in the public and private sectors, as well as experience in academia, giving her a well-rounded understanding of financial institutions policy and regulation. She's currently served as a commissioner in the CFTC after being unanimously confirmed by the Senate in 2022. The CFTC, she serves as a reliable voice for market participants and has fought for sound and competitive and efficient markets. Prior to joining CFTC, Ms. Johnson served as a professor of law for more than a decade, teaching at Emory and Tulane and Seton Hall University. She taught courses in banking law, the law and regulation of securities, derivatives markets, financial institutions, and systemic risk law and policy. Earlier in her career, she worked for large financial institutions and in private law practice in New York City. Good to see you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you. Final nominee in today's panel is the only one that's not a woman. The President's nominated Mr. Ito to serve as the independent insurance expert on FSOC. If confirmed, he'd be one of 10 voting members in FSOC, responsibility for monitoring and identifying financial instability risks. Mr. Ito's decades of insurance experience have prepared him to serve as a member of FSOC. Like the other nominees, Mr. Ito is well qualified. He currently serves as the insurance commissioner for the state of Hawaii. He first joined the Hawaii Division of Insurance some 30 years ago and has served in multiple roles within the office. As the insurance commissioner in the state, he's been a strong proponent for a fair and competitive insurance marketplace and for consumer protection. He's played an important role in helping Hawaii recover from the devastating wildfires, which result in the deaths of more than 100 residents and billions of dollars in damages. In addition to serving in Hawaii's insurance division, Mr. Ito's held several leadership roles with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, including Secretary Treasurer. Early in his career, he worked in private law practice in Hawaii. Welcome, Mr. Ito. Thanks again for the nominees, Ranking Member Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the noms for being here with us this morning. While I appreciate the Senate's important role in the nomination process, unfortunately, what brings us here today is a classic case of stubbornness. This administration wants to safeguard its progressive agenda no matter the cost. Not the employees of the FDIC and not the people they are supposed to serve. Chairman Gruenberg has been at the helm of the FDIC for nearly 2 decades, and under his leadership tenure, he's allowed rampant harassment, discrimination, vile behavior to continue to flourish. That's why I've said it several times before this committee. Mr. Gruenberg should resign immediately, not wait for someone to replace him, but start the culture of healing at the FDIC. Without that action, it is frustrating to the American people, frustrating to the employees at the FDIC that Mr. Gruenberg refuses to do the right thing in spite of a bipartisan coalition asking him to do so. Mr. Gruenberg and his allies in the White House have decided to play politics instead, Chair Grunberg is refusing to step down until a Biden nominee is confirmed, no matter the timeline. That's like having a leak in your roof. Instead of fixing it, you just put a bucket underneath and wait and wait and wait. Common sense reminds me the first step for restoration is stopping the leak and cutting out the damage so that repairs can begin. And it's clear, President Biden is not interested in cutting out the damage and not interested in accountability. Instead, the White House has taken this opportunity to try and make lemonade out of lemons by putting forward 3 additional nominees selected for the purpose of advancing his progressive regulatory agenda. And while I firmly believe we are here under false sense of urgency, we will do our very best to evaluate the nominees before us today on their merit and fulfill our constitutional responsibility. So let's start with Commissioner Goldsmith Romero. Commissioner, I enjoyed you taking the time, meeting with me a few days ago, and having a serious conversation about what it takes to change the culture of the FDIC and deal with some of the really important challenges coming our way. While you've had a long career in public service, your background lacks the banking regulatory experience necessary to carry out the critical responsibilities of the FDIC and fulfill the requirements of the FDI Act. The foremost mission of the FDIC is to maintain stability and confidence in our financial stability in the system, an important task that was front and center just last year as we watched SVB fail. The FDIC must ensure deposits, examine and supervise financial institutions for safety and soundness and consumer protections while standing ready to manage receivership of failed institutions. This is no small task. You have little experience with bank supervision or prudential law policymaking, let alone managing the world's largest deposit insurer. The next chair needs to be prepared to lead because not only are we going to have to confront the magnitude of Basel III endgame, but as I said a few times already, correcting the culture at the FDIC is so important. And it makes it challenging to have on-the-job training from my perspective. Turning to the management challenges at the FDIC, as we've discussed, I'm concerned with your ability to lead a much-needed cultural change. We talked in my office about the number of whistleblowers who've come forward and talked about your management approach as well. And I look forward to having an opportunity for you to share your responses during the question and answer part of this meeting today. Our next nominee, Ms. Carolyn Crenshaw, has been renominated for an additional 5-year term, ending in June of 2029, to serve as a member of the SEC. Commissioner Crenshaw, while I respect your deep knowledge of the capital markets, I have significant reservations over your nomination based on your views of what appears to be the limitless authority of the SEC. Take, for example, the SEC's climate disclosure rule, which the SEC has received nearly 24,000 letters on since its proposal. Despite widespread concern from the public, including from myself, as well as both Democrats and Republicans on this committee, you expressed frustration that the SEC didn't go far enough in its final rule. Furthermore, you've urged the SEC to contort its authority over the private markets, praising the finalization of the private fund advisory rule as an important step in the name of investor protection, competition, and market integrity. We know that the Fifth Circuit disagrees, ruling that the SEC went beyond the powers granted to it by Congress in the Investment Advisor Act. Our capital markets should not be a testing ground for the expansion of the administrative state, and your past actions give me serious pause for considering your nomination. I will close with this. I find it incredibly frustrating that we find ourselves here today, as this is a prime example of the Biden administration's MO of politics over people. While I look forward to hearing from the nominees, I must reiterate that real, meaningful change could be brought to the employees of the FDIC today if Marty Grunberg would simply step down.
Will the 4 nominees please rise? Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Do you agree to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of the Senate? Okay, please be seated. Senator Warner of Virginia would like to introduce Ms. Goldsmith Romero.
I would, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for that, and thank you for your comments about all the nominees. I think they are all uniquely qualified, and hope we will follow the tradition of this committee and that we will weigh these individuals on their merits. But I'm particularly here to introduce Christy Goldsmith Romero, who is nominated to be the next chair of the FDIC and currently serves as a commissioner on the Commodities Future Trading Commission. I'm proud to say that Christy is a Virginian through and through. She grew up in Virginia Beach, where her family continues to live, and her sister runs a small business. She attended Virginia Beach schools, is a graduate of Old Dominion. She's lived in Arlington for more than 20 years with her wife, Adrienne, who I had a chance to meet, and their 3 daughters, Kelsey, Brooke, and Julia, all, again, who attended Arlington Public Schools. She's also grandmother of 2 beautiful grandchildren who also live in Northern Virginia. Christy's father, Augusto Romero, came to America from the Philippines as a young man. He became a U.S. citizen, served in the U.S. Navy for 20 years, and was stationed in Norfolk. Her brother, Scott, served in the military with deployments to Bosnia, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and her brother-in-law is currently a retired SEAL. Continuing her family's deep dedication to serving our nation for the last 2 decades, the Commissioner has dedicated much of her career to protecting consumers and investors as a financial regulator, with leadership roles at the SEC, the Treasury Department, and her current position as Commissioner at the CFTC. In these positions, she is focused on results, reform, and accountability, all things that are going to be needed at the FDIC. And I believe will bring a broad range of relevant experiences to this new role. For example, she served for more than a decade as a Special Inspector General for the Troubled Asset Relief Program, SIGTARP, and we all remember the challenges that were faced there. In this role, her office was charged with acting as a watchdog over federal resources that were authorized by Congress to stabilize our financial system and support homeowners during that challenging time. During her tenure as Special Inspector General, her office recovered $11 billion for taxpayers and was responsible for convictions for more than 400 individuals who committed fraud, money laundering, and other crimes. That sounds like the kind of experience we need at the FDIC. In addition to her history of results there at SIGTARP, she has worked and spent her career working, again, as the chairman said, on a bipartisan basis, serving as counsel for 2 SEC chairs during the financial crisis, including, as the chairman pointed out, President Bush's SEC chair, Chris Cox, who was very, very active during that time. And again, to remind folks, she has been unanimously, that means all 100 of us, confirmed by the Senate twice. Now, there are a number of letters of recommendations that Christy has received. I would point out one from Sheila Bair, who many of us, again, on this committee in a bipartisan way have worked with over the years from the crisis and afterwards, who, again, if anyone would know what were the needed skills to be chair of the FDIC, I'd count Sheila Bair pretty high on that list, since she served as President Bush's head of the FDIC from 2006 to 2011. In her current role at the CFTC, she sponsors the Commission's Technology Advisory Committee, where she is engaged with industry and other stakeholders on challenges and risk in AI, blockchain, and digital assets. And again, in our conversations, I think going at the FDIC from that regulatory position, having a technology-based knowledge about how AI is going to change our systems and our banking regulations, blockchain, and the whole realm of digital assets. This is exactly the kind of experience we need at this troubled agency at this point. Christy's dedication to public service, the breadth of her bipartisan work experience, and her many accolades for improving financial accountability in the sector make her well qualified to take the lead at the FDIC at the crucial time in its history. And I have complete doubt that she can make the kind of cultural change, and we spend a lot of time talking about this, in this role, I hope, when she's confirmed. So I look forward to her testimony. And Mr. Chairman, I've got to step out for a minute, but I'll be back in time for my question.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mark. Thank you to all 4 of you. Please proceed, beginning with Ms. Goldsmith Romero. Welcome. And feel free, all of you, to introduce family members at the beginning of your testimony. Certainly, I know people like to do that for good reason. Thank you.
Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity and for your consideration. I'm honored to be nominated by President Biden to serve as the chair of the FDIC. Thank you, Senator Warner, for your gracious words and support. I do want to introduce my wife, Adrienne, and my daughters, Kelsey, Brooke, and Julia. I'm incredibly grateful for their love and support. I also want to thank my parents and my in-laws, my son-in-law, my grandsons and siblings for their love and support. Yes, I said grandsons. I am a very happy grandmother. I grew up in a military family where my parents raised me to be respectful and kind. My mom was a homemaker and later a school teacher, and my dad came from the Philippines and became a U.S. citizen after joining the U.S. Navy, where he served for 20 years. So he inspired my own service, 22 years under 4 presidents at the SEC, Treasury, and the CFTC. This nomination and your consideration are a testament to the American dream that my parents worked to achieve. I have dedicated my career to the stability of our nation's financial system so that it can serve families and businesses in search of their American dream. At the SEC, I protected investors and markets, and I was counsel to SEC chairs Chris Cox and Mary Shapiro during the financial crisis. After witnessing how a crisis on Wall Street can take a toll on Main Street, I wanted to be part of the solution. So I helped build an independent office at Treasury called the Office of Special Inspector General for the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or SIGTARP. Congress created TARP to provide $442 billion for more than 700 banks, housing, autos, insurance, and derivatives. Secretary Paulson said TARP was necessary to restore confidence in the banking system, and that is how SIGTARP viewed our mission. I was privileged to lead SIGTARP for 11 years, where everyone pulled together to accomplish this massive mission. And SIGTARP was successful. We brought transparency and oversight through reporting and recommendations. We protected TARP funds, recovering more than $11 billion, which was 27 times our cost. SIGTARP was known for its ability to uncover hidden fraud in banks, and I credit that to a proactive analytics-based system that we developed working within the bank supervisory privilege. We brought accountability through civil actions against large financial institutions and criminal convictions of more than 400 individuals, including 95 bankers and more than 90 bank borrowers, often related to failed banks. Courts sentenced 75 bankers to prison. I also gained a great appreciation for community banks because 625 banks in TARP were less than $100 million in size. And as I told Congress in 2011, small and medium-sized banks play an important role in our nation's economy and are the lifeblood of many communities across the country. They provide credit to small businesses and farms and serve customers in rural areas and small metropolitan areas not served by big banks. So my experience at the SEC, SIGTARP, and at the CFTC regulating derivatives will be invaluable if confirmed. Derivatives are an important tool to manage risk, particularly for the agricultural sector. At the same time, derivatives substantially contributed to the 2008 crisis, and the FDIC recently found shortcomings in the living wills of 4 large banks related to derivatives. So there's more to do. If confirmed, I will keep top of mind the significance of leading an agency tied to the financial well-being of every American and would prioritize maintaining stability and confidence in the financial system. As employees need to be supported in the FDIC's critical mission, I would prioritize a complete overhaul of the FDIC's workplace culture. The reporting is deeply disturbing and describes deep-seated cultural issues that have caused pain for many employees. It must not continue, and I will bring accountability. I would also ensure that banks of all sizes can provide depository services and loans to businesses and households, which is necessary for the U.S. economy. I would ensure that banks appropriately manage emerging risk and that the government keeps pace as banking has modernized. If confirmed, I look forward to working with Congress on these issues. But to be entrusted with leading the FDIC in this mission and at this moment would be a great honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goldsmith. Ms. Crenshaw, you're welcome to be here for 5 minutes. Thanks. Your statement.
Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. It is an honor to be considered for reappointment to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Last month, with the 90th anniversary of the passage of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, which was established at the SEC during the Great Depression. Over the years, the SEC and its staff have worked on behalf of generations of Americans to help ensure that the securities markets are fundamentally fair and safe for investors' hard-earned dollars. This capital, in turn, has financed all manner of businesses and allowed our economy to thrive. I have had the privilege to contribute to the SEC's work for over a decade. I began my career at the SEC as a staff attorney in the Division of Exams, helping to oversee institutions that manage millions of American savings. I also served in the Division of Investment Management and as counsel to Commissioners Kara Stein and Robert Jackson, focusing on how to strengthen investor protections in our increasingly complex markets. Most recently, I have served as a member of the Commission, using the expertise I developed as a member of the staff, of the securities laws, of the markets we regulate, and of the inner workings of the institution itself, to bring independent thought and analysis to the service of our mission. In addition to my SEC work, I also serve in the United States Army Reserve Judge Advocate General's Corps. My SEC and Army lives sometimes intersect, in good ways and in bad. I've been committed to bringing a message of financial readiness to American service members. Speaking with service members, cadets, midshipmen about the securities markets and financial literacy has been a highlight for me. Unfortunately, I'm also aware of the fraudsters who prey on everyday Americans, including service members and their families. In one particularly troubling SEC enforcement action, it's alleged that an Army financial counselor defrauded the families of fallen soldiers. If confirmed, I intend to continue to educate and advocate for strengthening protections for American service members. I would also work tirelessly in support of the SEC's mission, protecting investors, maintaining fair, orderly, and efficient markets, and facilitating capital formation. To me, this means promoting trust in the securities markets by reducing opportunities for bad actors to engage in fraud and manipulation. It means ensuring that investors have access to appropriate and truthful disclosures that help them make informed investment decisions. It means ensuring that the investment professionals fulfill their obligations to customers and elevate their interests above their own. And it means balancing the interests of those who participate in our markets to help ensure smaller players have the chance to compete. I believe that this framework benefits investors and those seeking to raise capital alike, and it's a pillar of our economy. Thank you to my husband, Alex Cole, who's here today, and my family. They are with me for their unwavering support. The littlest ones are at camp and at home. Figured they didn't want them disrupting the proceedings today. And thank you also to my fellow commissioners. Our discourse, although at times differing, leads to more thoughtful outcomes on behalf of the American public. And of course, thank you to the SEC staff. The talent, ingenuity, and commitment of the public service at the agency cannot be overstated. It's been a privilege and an honor to work alongside them in support of the SEC's mission. I feel truly honored to be here today. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Crenshaw. Ms. Johnson, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and other distinguished members of the committee. It is a privilege to appear before you today. I'm joined by my parents and my son Jackson and good friends from law school and law teaching. I'm honored to have been nominated by President Biden to serve as Assistant Secretary for Financial Institutions at the Department of Treasury. If I'm confirmed, I hope to draw upon my experience gained as an academic, a lawyer, in-house counsel in one of the largest Treasury Services divisions at one of the largest financial institutions in the world to ensure the strength and stability of our economy and to ensure the integrity of financial markets. I'm also hopeful to work tirelessly to ensure access for American individuals and families to credit, housing, and financial services on fair and reasonable terms. As a commissioner at the CFTC, I've advocated for customer protection and encouraged the adoption of recovery and resilience reforms, cyber preparedness, risk governance, and the effective enforcement against both sophisticated and garden variety fraud. For nearly 2 decades, I've researched, published, and taught about financial market risk regulation and financial market risk and regulation. As an associate dean at Emory and Tulane University Law Schools, I've held endowed professorships, received research awards and fellowships, and had the great pleasure of teaching many students. My research aims to identify, assess, and address exogenous, endogenous, and emerging risks in financial markets. During the global financial crisis of 2007 to 2009 and the ensuing Great Recession, a period characterized by falling GDP, double-digit unemployment, and dissipating retirement account and home values, I proposed reforms for the deeply interconnected, opaque, bespoke, bilateral credit derivatives markets. My recommended reforms aim to enhance transparency, reduce counterparty credit risk as well as liquidity risk, and to facilitate price discovery, each important to the stability of the financial system and to end users, such as farmers, ranchers, and growers who rely on derivatives markets for price discovery. Today, transformational innovation with light speed operational infrastructure promises to increase equity, access, transparency, and efficiency. In 2019 and again in 2021, I testified before Congress, emphasizing the need for responsible innovation, the significance of financial technology firms, the rise of artificial intelligence, and the creation of blockchain technology. These innovations promise to address an issue at the heart of my work, financial inclusion. For far too many in our country, particularly families in fragile financial circumstances, it can be extraordinarily expensive to be poor. Throughout my career, I've emphasized financial inclusion, entrepreneurship, and access to credit for local businesses, values I learned growing up in the Midwest and South and as a student at Georgetown University and the University of Michigan Law School. My great-great-great-grandfather, Alexander Moss, was born in May of 1821, and as a young man, his parents relocated to a town on the Wabash River about 80 miles north of Indianapolis. There he founded a storefront business and became a celebrated businessman, offering loans to African-American families and businesses with limited access to traditional lines of credit. He campaigned for the building of a school and a church in the African-American community. My family has maintained a strong commitment to public service. Shortly after graduating high school, my uncle volunteered for active duty during the Vietnam War. Others have served as judges, legal aid lawyers, teachers, nurses, and healthcare professionals supporting indigent communities. I'm grateful to my parents who join me today. They reinforce these values, and they've given me and my three sisters a sense of infinite possibility. I'm also joined by my son, a rising fifth grader at Georgetown Day School, and an aspiring engineer or professional soccer player, depending. Jackson, I'm grateful to you for your patience as I work to be in service of others and to teach you that we must measure our actions by what we do for those who are most in need. Thank you very much. I welcome your questions.
Normally I don't interject like this, but I love the look on who I believe your mother's face as she looked at Jackson, your grandson, when you said that. Mr. Ito.
Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and distinguished members of the committee. It is my honor and privilege to appear here before you today. I'm very honored and humbled to be President Biden's nominee for this position as the independent member with insurance expertise on the Financial Stability Oversight Council, also known as FSOC. I also want to thank you and your staff for the time you have spent with me during this process. First, I'd like to mention and thank my wife, Joy, who would have liked to be here with me today. Joy has always been very supportive and been a tremendous help through this entire process. However, due to a planned family vacation in which we committed to leave 9 other members on, she was unable to attend today. Our family member departed on their flight yesterday, and today and tomorrow I'll start on my journey to try to catch up with them. I was born and raised in the town of Hilo, Hawaii. The neighborhood I grew up was idyllic. We all knew our neighbors. More importantly, we all helped one another, neighbor helping neighbor. This upbringing instilled in me a value to try my best to contribute in whatever small way I can to help my community. After graduating with degrees in finance and law, I practiced law for nearly 7 years. This Then, as life takes its unexpected twists and turns, Hurricane Iniki struck and devastated the island of Kauai. This unfortunate set of circumstances led me to the Hawaii Insurance Division as a staff attorney. The value instilled in me to help others has kept me at the insurance division for over 30 years and then resulted in my interest in this position. Through my years at the insurance division, I have gained a unique set of experience and knowledge that I would bring to FSOC. To highlight a few, they include managing the impact of natural catastrophes and that have devastated communities, placing insurers under supervision, rehabilitation, and liquidation, and helping with the development of IT systems for the state and at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, also known as the NAIC. I also assisted in starting up residual market mechanisms in Hawaii when the availability of insurance during hard markets was limited or non-existent. I've worked closely with fellow state and international regulators, insurers, agents, legislators, and consumer groups to ensure the insurance marketplace remains fair, viable, and responsive, and that companies are financially solvent and there to pay claims. I know the important role of state regulators, insurance regulators play, and the benefit of collaboration on important questions of financial regulation. The three-part statutory mission of FSOC is to identify risks to financial stability of the United States, promote market discipline, and respond to emerging threats to the stability of the U.S. financial system. If confirmed, I will work every day to share my experience and insight with fellow FSOC members to help the organization achieve the mission Congress gave it. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Ito. I would express the opinion that Joy probably made the right choice, and we will not keep you long so you can catch up.
I'm glad to report that they made it safely to their destination.
I'm not suggesting what my colleagues ask about, but you may not get the most questions on this panel. But nonetheless, you should stay here for the entire panel. But then again, I don't know where you're going on your vacation. So thank you all. Start with you, Ms. Goldsmith. Romero, the FDIC suffered from significant long-standing workplace culture issues. It's been described as misogynistic, patriarchal, insular, outdated, good old boys club. Significant changes necessary because FDIC employees deserve a workplace free from discrimination and abuse and harassment. How do you go about addressing these longstanding issues that appear to be deeply ingrained through FDIC chairs of both parties for far too many years? Did seem to be ingrained in the agency's culture.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I mean, when I read the report, it reads like a bygone era, particularly for women and minorities and members of the LGBTQ plus community. So I'll learn more if confirmed and I can get in there, but let me give you my top line thoughts. The first is to modernize the federal workplace to one that has the best practices that you would expect to see in federal workplaces, that invests in staff morale and values and supports employees. The second is to herald the employees and managers that have been doing the right thing. Third, I'd send a clear message that harassment and discrimination and retaliation will not be tolerated. So that includes investigations and holding people accountable. And I can say that the conduct in the report would warrant multiple removals. Additionally, we need to put in place what is the normal standard federal EEO process for complaints, and then encourage people to use it rather than have them live in fear. I would change the litigation adverse culture so that problems could be addressed right away rather than moved around or kick the can down the road. And then the era of each office being a fiefdom would be over. There would not be 70 plus FDICs. There'd be one FDIC with all employees in all offices following the same rules, the same way.
Thank you. You discuss how your tenure as did SICTAR informed your understanding. I mean, informed your understanding of our banking system and prepared you to lead the FDIC into its next much better chapter.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. SIGTARP was really deep into banks at the worst time in our nation's history. We were inside the same confidential supervisory privilege that FDIC and other regulators hold, and we were dealing with failed banks all the time and banks that were in trouble. So we are actively monitoring all of the 700 plus banks in TARP, making recommendations to Treasury. A lot of those were community banks that were having trouble getting out of TARP. And we were following all of that and following their health and condition. In terms of our investigations, and we prosecuted more than 100 bankers, more than 90 bank borrowers who hurt banks. And so we would go into banks just like a bank examiner does. We would analyze all the bank's books and records, the examiner's records. We'd be talking to banks, employees and management, as well as the examiners. We'd be using our proactive data analytics-based system to trend out call reports and be looking at CAMEL's ratings and really trying to identify areas of risk, how banks were managing with risk, and then following whether they were following the regulatory rules or not. And then on the largest banks, I did a lot of work on systemic risk, capital, liquidity issues, things like that, and then served on a council of IGs with oversight over FSOC.
Thank you. Listening to you, having talked to you before, and I know you talked to a number of senators in both parties, and looking at your experience and background says to me there is no question, there is no real reason to oppose you except for partisan reasons. And I hope the committee rises above that. Ms. Crenshaw, I'm running up against the clock. We'll have time for one question to her. Ms. Johnson, Mr. Ito, I apologize for that. We will get you written questions. Ms. Crenshaw, Americans have become more involved in financial market in recent years as workers become responsible for saving for their own retirements. That's a whole nother debate. But the system's often rigged for Wall Street against everyone else. We know that most of inflation in this country is because of corporate greed. We see all kinds of signs of this is a system for Wall Street more than for workers. What steps does SEC need to take to make sure Americans have the tools and the information they need to feel confident they'll be treated fairly as they save for the future?
Thank you. Yeah, the fact that Americans' retirement is in their own hands more than ever means that the SEC must promote trust in our markets. We do that by reducing bad actors, ensuring truthful and appropriate disclosures, and making sure that market participants play by the rules, all of them. This helps maintain confidence in the markets so investors know it's a safe place to put their money.
Thank you. Senator.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldsmith Romero. Thank you once again for the conversation we had. And I told you then I was going to ask you these questions, so they're not a surprise to you whatsoever, give you an opportunity to deal with some of the challenges. Unlike the chairman who suggests the only reason to vote against someone in this committee is because of partisan reasons. That's just hogwash, to be blunt. The truth is that the whistleblower complaints, and I think the whistleblowers would actually disagree with the chairman's comments as well, whistleblower complaints suggest that the same challenges that we see at the FDIC under Grunberg, some of those same challenges exist with SIGTARP under your leadership. And so my question to you is, how would you respond to some of the challenges that we've talked about in my office?
Thank you, Senator. I really do appreciate the time to address this. I absolutely disagree. There's nothing like what was in the Cleary report at the FDIC. We had, and I was very glad to have this, a very independent and fair process that employees could go to and they felt safe going to, and they did. And I'm glad they did, because then as management, we could see what the issues were that we had to address. We never had any women complaining about sexual harassment. We never had these issues of retaliation. I was responsible. If there had been discrimination, harassment, retaliation, I would have taken it seriously and dealt with it right away. The findings were, and I have to respect the process, but also the outcome. In 11 years, there was only one finding against the agency. It was early on in my tenure, and I took it very seriously and addressed it. I'll also say that all IGs and their senior staff are held to a very, very high standard because we fall under the oversight of SIGI. And so SIGI has an integrity committee that will do reports and investigations on IGs, and they never had any findings. But even without having discrimination or retaliation or harassment, what I can tell you is that I still cared about employee morale and trying to have employees feel supported and trying to, we just created this environment of high dignity and professionalism and respect so that employees could bring their best selves to work and work like a team, and the senior staff shared those same values. And I believe that's reflected in the great success that SIGTARP had. We were a very small agency and at any compared to the mission that we had to take on. So everyone was pulling together, and we were able to have that success and protect the financial system. So that's why I want to go to the FDIC and do the same thing there.
Can you confirm for me that you've had no complaints filed against you specifically for discrimination, harassment, or retaliation?
Senator, I think it would be very normal to name me in any kind of complaints, and I would welcome that because I'm ultimately the one responsible for changing things and fixing things right away. So the buck stops with me, and so I would be named. That would be a very normal thing to name all the managers all the way up. But in my 11 years, we only had this one finding early on.
I'm certainly familiar with the concept that there are three sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. And so I certainly appreciate you answering that question. In my office, we also talked about the importance of trying to find a way for the employees, especially at the FDIC and beyond, that have had challenges within the organization to be able to go forward with complaints, but not go forward with complaints. And the same with organization that actually manages. So under Chair Grubenberg, has a recent proposal creating the FDIC's Office of Professional Conduct and Office of Equal Employment Opportunity. Of course, the challenge is that all those reports, complaints, and concerns come straight back to the chair. How would you create a culture where the person who is handling the complaints isn't a part of the organization itself?
Thank you, Senator. I really do appreciate that you and I had some time to talk about the importance of it having an independent and fair process. So in the federal government, the EEOC sets that up. There's various agencies for different kinds of allegations, but the EEOC sets that up and works with the agencies to do that in a way where the investigations can be investigated so that there's no influence on the fact finder. These are the types of things that are important, that independence.
Do you have state supervisory experience?
So, Senator, I have worked a lot with the state banking regulators, quite a bit. In fact, Pierce Bank in Washington, we were able to go in with the state banking regulators for years that we did, working hand in hand. We ultimately found why the bank failed, uncovered the cause of it, and then we brought significant convictions in that case. I believe 15 bankers who were convicted. We were working hand in hand with the state banking regulators.
So you do believe that your nomination comports with the FDI Act?
Are you talking about to have the
Yes.
banking super? So I'm not. If the way it's written, I understand the issue there. I believe if the way it's written is that someone who has to have worked in a state banking regulator, I have not done that. I've just worked with the state banking regulators. That was just one example.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Senator Scott. Senator Smith of Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Chair Brown and Ranking Member, and welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for your willingness to serve. I'm very grateful for that. Ms. Crenshaw, I'm going to start with you. I think one of the things that I see is that retail investing has just changed dramatically. It's really almost unrecognizable for what it was even 10 years ago. Smartphones, the capacity for people to trade is so easily accessible. Social media has become a way to draw people into new schemes, and as a result, I think retail investors' appetite and access to new and more sophisticated financial products is growing and quite dramatic. So could you talk to us, please, about how you view the SEC's role in protecting retail investors and maintaining fair markets, particularly in the face of these evolving, the evolving investment environment?
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator. First and foremost, I think education is fundamentally important. We need to educate investors on how to assess the pros and cons of various investments, of how to assess the risks and opportunities that different investments opportunities provide. So first and foremost, I would start with that. Second, we need to ensure that the intermediaries are abiding by their obligations, the investment advisors, the broker-dealers, and ensuring that they are abiding by their fiduciary obligations or the regulation best interest. And we need to ensure that we hold bad actors to account so that there is faith in the market. So really accountability and transparency, I think, are the fundamental ways that we need to ensure that those retail investors, which is good, we want to encourage retail investors because, again, retirement is in their hands more than ever. But we do need to ensure that it's a safe place for them so that they have more returns when they get their money out than they did when they started.
Thank you very much. I think, just as a follow-up, I think that oftentimes there is some confusion about whether these new investment tools or products still have to abide by the same consumer protection rules that we have in place. Could you just address that? Because I think that creates, and sometimes it seems to create nearly a loophole. And how would you approach that at the SEC?
Absolutely. I think to the degree they are securities, they must abide by all of the securities laws and regulations. And I think it's as straightforward as that. And when they are not, we have enforcement tools to hold them to account. I think that's also where education comes into account, both for investors but for the marketplace. For example, ETPs are very different from ETFs. And you hear a lot about ETFs. They're ubiquitous in retirement accounts. We've recently passed some ETPs. They are not ETFs. The protections around them are incredibly different. And both the marketplace and the investors need to understand what their obligations are.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Commissioner Goldsmith Romero, I really appreciated the conversation that we had and appreciated very much the professionalism and the deep bench of experience that you bring to this extremely important role. And I know that Chair Brown asked you about the ways in which your experience at TARP will shape your leadership at the FDIC. And Chair Brown, I found that very, very helpful. So I'm going to just briefly follow up on a bit of what Ranking Member was asking. As you tackle the need for culture change and accountability at FDIC, I, for one, think that somebody with a fresh perspective, somebody who is not part of that culture but is coming in, can provide the kind of leadership that's needed. And so could you just address that for me? And could you talk a bit about how you see coming in as a new person in an agency that needs culture change, which is very difficult to do, let's be honest, how you see approaching that?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the question. So I've been in the federal government for 22 years, so I know what is right and what is good. And what I'm reading here in this report is not that. It's not that at all. And I've had the great opportunity to work at 3 different agencies and lead a federal office for 11 years. So it's not everybody there. There's, I'm sure, a great number of people who are doing the right thing, and here the agency's reputation is tarnished. So I'm going to go in and go back to reestablishing the FDIC as being a premier regulator. Like I said, herald the people who are doing the right thing. Put in all the normal processes, procedures, best practices that I have enjoyed and led, and make sure that everyone feels safe and can be focused on mission.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer, and I think, again, it demonstrates how your experience will allow you to be an effective leader in a very important agency. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Senator Smith. Senator Rounds from South Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, to all of you and to your families, thank you for being here. To the families, this can be a pretty emotional time period for the folks that are up here in front because they don't have any idea at all what kind of questions they're really going to get. They've had a chance to meet with most of us beforehand, and they get an idea about what it is, but there's always that trepidation, and you all get to put up with them during that time period, so we thank you for that. Ms. Johnson and Mr. Ito, thank you for being here. I'm not going to have any questions for either one of you two, so you can relax for just a minute here. Ms. Romero, appreciate the opportunity to visit with you. As you know, the federal banking agencies, including the FDIC, have proposed a comprehensive revision to their capital rules that would substantially increase capital requirements. This revision is known as the Basel III Endgame, and we talk about it a lot within the banking institutions, but not a lot outside. We know that there will be material changes made to the entire proposal. Just Tuesday, Chair Powell says that he supports another comment period. If confirmed, would you support another comment period?
Thank you. And I really appreciated when we met in your office and were able to talk through some of these deep, complex issues. I think a reproposal is always on the table when you have a rule that's proposed and you get that many negative comments. And so, there is the Administrative Procedures Act and the logical outgrowth doctrine that would have to be applied. But I'm not. I think it's on the table. I'm not looking to get something done fast. I'm looking to get something done right.
Okay, look, in this particular case, you would be expected to make a decision rather quickly as to whether or not that's going to occur. Your nomination is up right now, and they're in the middle of making this decision right now. So you're going to be put in a really tough position here. And if you haven't done the background to decide whether or not you would support a continuation or not, that's going to be a problem.
Well, Senator, I'm not, I've done the background on what's going on with Basel. I'm just not privy to the changes that are being made, and do they fall within the logical outgrowth doctrine? Do they not? But what I can assure you is I am very open to a reproposal, but if confirmed, I would need to get in there and sort of understand this. But I'm not looking to rush something through for the sake of rushing it through. I'm looking to make sure that the regulation is long-lasting, it's going to work, and I want to understand all the unintended consequences.
There is another possibility on that, because that decision is going to be made very, very shortly. And I recognize that they're asking you to move into a position rather quickly in this particular case. If you are confirmed, and we need to move forward quickly in this particular case, just because of the timing. This has been around for a long time, but it's coming up now. Would you recuse yourself from voting and allow Vice Chair Hill to finish the work on the Basel III Endgame proposal? Would you commit to that?
Senator, I think if I'm confirmed as chair, there'll be a decision made at the board level. I don't see a reason to recuse, but I can tell you what I'm trying to explain is I haven't seen the changes. I'm certainly inclined to have a reproposal whenever there are this many comments, and then there's going to be broad material changes. That's my inclination.
The broad material changes appear to be necessary if this is going to move forward at all. I think that's pretty clear, because I think over 95% of all the requests recommended making major changes in multiple different areas on it. Okay. In light of Ms. Romero, in light of the recent Supreme Court ruling on Chevron deference, agencies like the FDIC will need to make certain that they are complying with congressional intent. If confirmed, do you commit to implementing the Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief, and Consumer Protection Act, that's S-2155, as intended by Congress? I'm just curious, this really is a case of where there has been a rulemaking change in the way that it's going to be viewed in the future by the courts. Intent is really going to be important. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Senator. Yeah, I really believe in that we are limited as regulators to the laws that are before us, and we always strive to look at congressional intent. Everything I do now is to sort of say, okay, well, what's the authorization here from Congress, and how do we stick with it? S-2155 is the law of the land. I'm gonna comply with it. I really believe in the sentiments behind it in terms of tailoring regulation, as we talked about it. All banks are not the same, and I also want to understand the unintended consequences of all these rules.
So if confirmed, would you commit to consulting with Congress if you view intent is not clear?
100%, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time
Thanks,
is
Senator
expired.
Rounds. Senator Warner, Virginia is
Well,
recognized.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me actually pick up where my friend from South Dakota, as somebody, unfortunately, with to some folks on my side of the dais, I was up to my eyeballs in 2155. So if you need intent suggestions, I'd be happy to share those with you. But I also got
On a bipartisan basis.
on a bipartisan basis, although we ought to go to she ought to go first to the people who took the most grief for that. But, and I also think, your comment, Ms. Goldsmith Romero, Commissioner, is on Basel III was appropriate, absolutely appropriate. And the fact that you think, you've not been told about, and just as we've not been told about, what the reworkings are going to be and whether that needs to be fully reissued or additional comment period. I mean, I think it would be irresponsible to make a judgment when you, just like me, has not seen the revisions yet. So I think, and based on our conversations, you understood the complexity of this issue, and we all think how we deal with Basel III is terribly, the end game terribly important, and having the full economic analysis out. The Chair Powell committed to that yesterday, and making sure whatever direction we head, that it works in harmony with already existing standards, I think is really important. I appreciate the way you've addressed this, and I know members have already asked this, but I want to go at it again, since it appears some of my colleagues have questions about, your background and experience. I think you've got the right background. I think you've got the right experience. But the truth is, FDIC is a large entity. It is very complicated, and you're going to have a challenge to, both keep the trains running on time and, not move away from your critical financial supervisory role. So can you give us a little bit of outline, recognizing you're not there yet, but can we look at 30-day metrics, 60-day metrics, 90-day, what are the things that we could see from you, particularly on the culture change, that I hope you're going to be confirmed, that we could look back and say, well, did she do what she said as she came into this role?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the opportunity to address that. So I think there's going to be some immediate things that need to take place, and that the first of that is making sure that there's the right process in place, because there was confusion in the process, and also making sure employees feel safe. And all the managers are encouraging people to use that process. Otherwise, if you don't have a process in place that people trust, then management does not know what's going on and can't fix the problem. So that's one of the first things that would need to be fixed. I think this issue of field offices and fiefdoms, that's going to take a little bit longer, I would say. As I said before, we had field offices at SIGTARP, and I did a number of things to make sure that all the offices were operating in the exact same way in terms of conduct and professionalism, but also in terms of substance and what they're doing. We can't have offices moving in a different direction than, for example, what the policies and practices and procedures allow. So that's going to be a larger issue. I think there's definitely going to be accountability, and that might take a little bit of time, but we want to do it right. We want to make sure we go in and right the ship. And then there's really just this issue of modernizing culture and modernizing ideas, changing a litigation adverse mentality. I think you could do some things right at the beginning to start with that, but these are deep-seated, fully ingrained issues. Some of changing the whole culture is going to take a bit of time, but we also we can't take our eye off the ball of the mission. Mm-hmm. And so we had bank failures in spring 2023. We've got to make sure that everyone's in position and can be focused on mission. And
I again agree with the chairman. This was not a problem at the FDIC that happened overnight. It is going to take time, but my hope would be we'd see a 90-day plan, 180-day plan, and some of the things that we can look at metrics. I'm going to get one more question to you, Commissioner, but I do want to say to Ms. Crenshaw, for the record, I'd love to both compliment what, frankly, Jay Clayton started on human capital disclosure, and I know you've been active on that as well, and want to make sure we continue that good work. And an issue that my colleagues have heard me come back to repeatedly is better utilization of the discount window. Chair Powell in the House yesterday was saying, the fact that they sometimes publish folks ends up creating that stigma. I just, when you get in and you come to the same conclusion that discount window needs to be better utilized and we need reforms, will you continue to work with Chair Powell, me, and others who care about this underutilized tool?
Absolutely, I care about it too. I mean, in times of crisis, banks need liquidity and they need it fast. We saw liquidity dry up very quickly in the crisis, and that's actually what led to the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP. So we don't want to be in that same position again. So these ideas on taking away the stigma of the discount window and then making sure banks are ready to use it, that they can potentially pre-pledge collateral and that they know how to use it, I think that's worth taking the time to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Warner. Senator Tillis of North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations to all of you for your nominations. Commissioner Crenshaw, I want to start with you. You made a statement after the SEC's recent climate rule, and I think to use your words, you said you considered the rule to be the bare minimum and not the rule I would have written. So I'm curious, with respect to Scope 3 reporting requirements, is that one of the root causes of your disappointment? If you can keep your comments brief, I would appreciate it.
Sure, Senator, thank you. With respect to bare minimum, my intent there was that
Where did it fall short?
It fell short. Well, investors, I talked about two places where investors, what I was really thinking about when I said not the rule I would have written was I would have thought about using models, assumptions, and estimates much more completely than we did. And that way we could have gotten more information to investors in a way that was less expensive. And I would also considered robust safe harbors from liability.
If
And I think-
confirmed, would you consider reopening the rule? And if you did, would Scope 3 reporting requirements be a part of the revised rule?
I don't know, Senator. As you know, it's in litigation right now, so a lot is going to depend on the outcome of the litigation, and I
Do
don't
you
know.
generally support the notion of Scope 3 reporting requirements?
I think investors had put comments in the comment file, and I think we need to balance the interests. But I think there's a way that you can look at assumptions and estimates and a safe harbor from liability to ensure that the costs are not prohibitive and to ensure that you're not asking farmers and unregistered entities to provide information.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Goldsmith Romero, I want to go back to Silicon Valley Bank. What, in your opinion, if you could only, the major root cause of SVB's failure, what caused of SVB's failure, what was it? Was it, well, actually, let me not give you choices. What do you think the root cause of SVB Bank was?
Thank you, Senator, for that failure of risk management at the bank and then failures on the regulatory supervision.
Yeah, so you didn't see capitalization as an issue?
I was not, a bank regular at that time, but it seemed like the root cause is what you were just asking.
Poorly managed and poorly supervised?
Correct.
I think as a result, because at the time of it seems like it was ages ago. It's hard to believe it hasn't been that long. But at the time of the failure, everybody was saying, and because they felt so many other banks were failing, was it your opinion that what we saw there was going to ripple through? I know we had the one other failure, First Republic, but do you view those as some of us do as kind of outliers in the banking industry based on their models?
So this is
activities?
This is a really interesting question. So let me take it back even a little bit farther, which is the crisis. And this really comes down to consumer confidence, right? If consumers don't have confidence that their money is safe, businesses and individuals, then you're going to see bank runs and you're going to see contagion. You may have bank runs not even related to the banks who are in trouble. And what we don't want to have that. We don't want to have people pulling their money out of the bank and putting it in just one of the hugest banks thinking that it's safe. And so, I think there was a situation where there was Silicon Valley Bank and Signature, and they tried to, the regulators tried to contain that. But I do think we need to really be looking deeply at this issue of bank runs and consumer confidence, particularly in modernized banking.
I just felt like there was some thinking. A lot of people were attributing the Senate Bill 2155. I was one of four on my side that worked with Senator Warner and others on that bill. They were trying to blame it on just a lack of regulation, but it doesn't really. It seemed like a lack of supervision and a lack of risk management. So I'll move on from there. Kind of curious about your view of the 2024 stress test. I read the results of those stress tests to say that our banks are pretty well capitalized. How do you read the results of those stress tests?
Yeah, so again, I'm on the outside looking at it just like you are. And so it does seem like some capital is strong. I think there are some areas that need to be looked at, but that's how I read the.
But isn't stress test by definition really subjecting the banks to some of those areas? So do you think that the stress tests themselves are insufficient, or you just need to look at the details within the stress test scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very familiar with stress tests. I mean, it's designed for capital adequacy, and so.
And it's literally stressing, so it's coming up with extraordinary circumstances. So
Absolutely, sir. Yes.
okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Till. Senator Warren from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to all of our nominees. Good to see you here today. So, Commissioner Goldsmith Romero, as chair of the FDIC, your job would involve not only helping to prevent bank crises, but also cleaning up after them when the banks fail. You've had decades of experience as a financial regulator, including getting up close and personal with teetering banks during your 10 years as head of SIGTARP. In the fallout from the 2008 financial crisis, Congress created a $700 billion fund called the Troubled Asset Relief Fund Program, or TARP. It was designed to stabilize the financial system, and you led the oversight of that huge fund for a decade. You also managed SIGTARP's $45 million operating budget and its hundreds of staff. By all accounts, you did so with incredible success, recovering over $11 billion for the American people. In fact, I understand that for every dollar your office spent, the American taxpayer got a $29 return. That's pretty good. Commissioner Goldsmith Romero, your work at SIGTARP required you to review the quality of bank assets, confidential examination reports, management processes, and compliance with federal regulations. So how does that compare with the kind of work a bank examiner does at the OCC, the FDIC, or the Federal Reserve?
It's very, very, very similar, Senator. I appreciate that question. So we would go in just like a bank examiner goes in. In fact, sometimes we'd grab the operating system and go through the banks. We'd look at what led up to the call reports. We'd trend out the call reports. We'd see changes in CAMEL's ratings. I mean, we would go deep into these banks. I think the difference is that we had more time to look at these. We dealt with a lot of failed banks, troubled banks. We would determine the cause of the failure. And then when we would determine the cause of the failure, if we could hold some bankers accountable for that, we would seek reimbursement to the FDIC for losses to the Deposit Insurance Fund. That's harder for bank examiners to do this. And then we had a higher standard that we had to prove in doing our work.
All right, and that's where your $29 to $1 invested came from, holding these folks accountable.
Yeah, this is how we got our great return on investment.
Good. That seems like pretty useful experience for the person named to lead the agency in charge of dealing with failed banks. In fact, I can't think of better experience. The last Republican who was named to head the FDIC had no experience in dealing with failed banks. Ms. Goldsmith Romero, you ran SIGTARP at a time of extraordinary upheaval in the banking industry. Can you estimate how many troubled banks you dealt with?
Hundreds. I mean, there were more than 700 banks in TARP. We were constantly working with them, trying to understand their health and their condition and risk that they faced. And then we investigated and went very deep into triple digits.
Okay. So you spent years digging through the guts of troubled banks and compliance with banking and securities laws. You kept some open, others you ended up closing, and that experience is pretty much spot on for somebody to lead the agency in charge of monitoring the banks and cleaning up the ones that fail. Commissioner Goldsmith Romero, we know that there are workplace issues at the FDIC. During your time at SIGTARP, there were some workplace complaints filed. Should that be a red flag that you are not a successful manager?
No, Senator. You want to have a process that people feel safe using and that they actually do use and they're not fearful of. And that does not exist at the FDIC. But you also want to look at the results. And in 11 years, we only had one finding against us early in my tenure, and I took it seriously and addressed it. So ultimately, what you want is to set up an environment of high dignity, professionalism, respect. Employees feel supported and valued, so that they'll come in and they'll give 110%, and that's how we got such great results at SIGTARP.
Yeah, well, I very much appreciate both that you have thought through these issues and actually have extensive experience with it. These are critically important economic positions that the nominees before us are eminently qualified to fill. I'm sorry I don't have time to talk with everyone, but I really appreciate your work here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Kennedy from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Romero, I know you've read the Cleary-Gottlieb report. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
I watched a lot of powerful people in this town try to cover it up. They said, oh, it's bad, but don't worry. The FDIC chairman will fix it. This was the same FDIC chairman who had been at the agency since God was a corporal and under whom all this stuff happened. And fortunately, that point of view didn't prevail. Here's the way I read the report. 97 people at that agency reported 145 separate incidents of sexual assaults. 91 others reported 141 separate incidents of gender or sexuality-based discrimination. 187 people reported 320 separate incidents of verbal abuse. Over 500 people, about 10% of the people at the agency, came forward about discrimination, harassment, mistreatment they faced at the FDIC. Now, I listened to you say all the right words. And you talked about accountability. And you talked about refurbishing the tarnished reputation of the agency. And you talked about listening. And I appreciate all that. But the phrase that got my attention was, send a clear message that this won't be tolerated. If you want to do that, what you need to do before you do your listening tours or all that other stuff, you need to investigate every one of these allegations, every single one, and find out if they're true. And if they are true, then somebody ought to be, the person who's responsible should be fired, should be sued, and or should be prosecuted. And then you'll have a cleaner agency. Now, I don't have any questions. You're either going to do it or you're not. But I think a lot of the members of the committee agree with me. We're going to be watching. Every time the FDIC comes before the banking committee, as long as I'm on it, I'm going to ask you about progress with specificity. Ms. Crenshaw, this climate risk disclosure rule that you're so proud of, how much is that going to cost the companies that you regulate?
Senator, on a per issuer basis over 10 years, I think the economic analysis was roughly $250,000 to $750,000 on a per issue basis over 10 years.
What's the total cost, please?
I don't know the total cost.
Do you have no idea?
Well, it's going to depend very much on the individual issuer.
So you impose this rule on every single entity that you regulate and you don't know the total cost?
Well, Senator, it depends on the individual issuer. We put in place.
You don't know the total cost?
It's going to depend on the individual
You
issuer.
don't know, do you?
Because it's going to depend. I don't think there's necessarily.
It's going to be billions of dollars, isn't it?
I don't believe on a per issuer basis that it's going to be.
I didn't say per issue. I mean the total cost.
Senator,
It's going to be billions of dollars, isn't it?
I don't know, Senator.
Yeah, it is, and you know it is. How much, after asking all these businesses to spend billions of dollars, how much is that going to lower world temperatures?
I don't know. It's not designed to it's not designed to lower temperatures, Senator. It's designed to give investors information so that they can assess
Why don't
risk.
you just send them an email?
Well, I think there's a lot of securities laws that would prohibit us just sending an
Let me
email.
be sure I understand. You voted to spend, look, we all want clean air and bright water. You voted to spend, to require the people regulated and the entities regulated by the FDIC billions and billions of dollars, even though you can't say really how much it's going to cost. You're just going to make them do it. And you can't tell me today how much it's going to lower world temperatures?
Again, that's not what the rule's designed for, Senator.
Well, what's it designed for?
It's designed
To harass people?
to give investors information to
Virtue
assess risk,
signaling?
to appropriately allocate their capital as they see fit.
I mean, this is insanity. You have a personal supply chain. Suppose we passed a law that said periodically you've got to report personally the carbon emissions of the people who make all the clothes you buy. You buy clothes, don't you?
I do, Senator.
And the car you drive, and the house you live in, and the food you eat. How much do you think that would cost?
We carved out all of the smaller entities, EGCs, SRCs, from the final rule to ensure
If you
that.
think everybody ought to report, why don't you make this rule applicable to everybody at the SEC personally and see how they like it?
Again, we carved out the smallest. We took into account the comment file, and we tried
Tell me
to
again how
appropriately
much this
balance
is
it.
going to lower world temperatures. I don't know if I remember asking.
I think you know the answer to that, Senator Kennedy. Thank you.
Zero.
Your time has expired. Senator Cortez Masto's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Crenshaw, unfortunately, you weren't able to answer the questions that were asked you. Are there any that you would like to respond to, particularly the total cost amount? You were trying to explain why you couldn't put a total cost to it.
Thank you, Senator. It really depends on the individual issuer, and we put in the final rule some phased-in compliance dates. We really catered it to and balanced it to what we thought was appropriate based on the comment file. So smaller reporting companies, emerging growth companies do not have the same obligations that some of the larger issuers have. And thus, the cost is going to depend on the size of the issuer at any given moment, who's in which category, and again, it's much more accurate to look at it on a per issuer basis, in my view.
Thank you. I will say this also about your background, and I appreciate your public service at the SEIC. I also appreciate your military service as a captain in the United States Army Reserve and the Judge Advocate General Corps. Thank you very much. You have been a leader. This has been my focus and some on this committee in ensuring that the men and women who serve our country don't get taken advantage of by scammers. And I appreciate your work there. There is one case that I have been following, and it's the case against Kaz Crafty, an Army financial counselor who used his position to manipulate grieving Gold Star families by directing them to transfer their benefits into brokerage accounts he managed and made commissions off of outside of his official duties. What more do you think the SEC can do to protect members of the military and their families from being victims of scammers like this?
Thank you, and I haven't said this today. I actually just got picked up for a major, so
Congratulations.
I will be promoted in the military at some point. Thank you. So first and foremost, I think we need to impose harsher penalties for frauds and scams that target our military. We need to make it sure that there's a cost to targeting our service members and their vulnerable family members. I would also love to work with your office and members of this body to ensure that conflicts of interest among military financial counselors are prohibited. Their interests need to be with the service member and not their own. And I think we need to really figure out a way to eliminate those conflicts of interest. And I think that they need to receive adequate training, licensure, and oversight. And I think there are ways to think through a centralized body or a way to make sure that that oversight and that accountability is there for financial counselors in the military.
Thank you. The more that we can do with our federal agencies to protect those our families in the military, I think it's just so crucial. They are always constantly the victims of scammers. So thank you for that. Let me ask Ms. Goldsmith Romero. First of all, there's been a lot of conversation about your previous experience as an Inspector General, overseeing the capital investments of more than 700 banks, and you led a staff of 140 people. You did incredible work. Thank you very much. I was Attorney General when you were at SIGTARP. Thank you. During the downturn of the crisis, it was something I took on for the big banks as well. So based on your experience, what can you describe for me the skills that you developed during that time that you will bring to the FDIC?
Thank you, Senator, and I really appreciate you working with me as SIGTARP in your position as Senator for the great state of Nevada. So I became an expert in capital and liquidity and the interconnections of our financial institutions that not only will bring down banks that are connected to each other, which we saw, but also have Wall Street be interconnected to Main Street, so we can see how Main Street is hurt when Wall Street gets in trouble. So, there was a lot that I did. I would have to meet constantly with Chair Bear at the FDIC and Secretary Paulson and Secretary Geithner and Chair Ben Bernanke to figure out how do we get in this position. How do we get ourselves so vulnerable, and then what needs to change for that? And some of that went then to Dodd-Frank and the changes that need to be happening. And so I know all of sort of the Dodd-Frank and what needs to be implemented to get our financial system in a position where it's much healthier. Then on inside of banks and doing our investigations and also our auditing of just what banks needed during times of great turmoil. When there was a lot of failed banks happening that we were going into and then determining the causes of the failure, we could see how banks manage risk or didn't manage risk. We could see the difference if there was a culture of risk management or if there wasn't. These are the types of things that are really, really important from a supervisory standpoint and then also just more generally as a financial regulator.
Thank you. I know my time is out, so I won't be able to ask the rest of the questions, but let me just say to all of the panelists, thank you. Thank you for your willingness to serve. Congratulations on your nominations, and welcome to all of the family members who are either here or watching on as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cortez Masto. Senator Hagerty's recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Brown. Commissioner Crenshaw, I'd like to start with you, please. You were a vocal supporter of including Scope 3 emissions in the SEC's climate disclosure rule. I'd just like you to briefly explain for us your views on these requirements.
Thank you, Senator. Again, I think that investors were asking for information, and I think one of the things investors were asking for was a variety of information, and there was a lot of support for Scope 3. At the end of the day, as you know, we did not include it. One of the things that I really think we should have thought about more completely were using models and estimates and assumptions, ways that issuers could provide investors with the information that they were looking for without having to go to the farmers, without having to go upstream or downstream. And I also think we could have really considered a robust safe harbor from liability. That way it would have reduced costs for issuers and provided information to investors.
I'm glad to hear you talk about cost right now, but it seemed that when you were responding to Senator Kennedy, you didn't have a good idea about what the costs are, but the cost would be significant, the complexity obviously very, very considerable. When it comes to nominations, our job is to endorse or reject the policy positions that you've taken, because we've got to look at your past history as we think about the future. I really find it troubling that you leveraged your office at the SEC to advance these extreme climate positions. I think you've gone way beyond the remit of the SEC, and it's deeply concerning. Not only did you support this climate disclosure rule, but you have argued that it didn't go far enough. And these requirements would crush businesses from manufacturing to energy to agriculture. I've talked to farmers in my state. They talk about, and farmers across the nation, frankly, have talked about how much of a burden this would have imposed on them, disclosing personal information, business information, or go out of business. You talked about wanting to impose cost on scammers. Well, I can tell you, you would impose cost on farmers to the extent you could even put them out of business, and the type of legal liability and exposure that this might be a predicate for, I don't know where you're trying to go with this. This absolutely has no place in my view. This is a very misguided proposal you've supported. Commissioner Goldsmith Romero, I'd like to come to you. It was reported that in 2016, when you were the Inspector General for TARP and investigating corruption allegations related to Mayor Mike Duggan's Detroit demolition program, that you told state investigators to, quote, go dark and halt that investigation, noting to your staff Mayor Duggan's Obama White House ties and his potential Clinton administration role. Is that true? Did you tell mission investigators in 2016 to slow down their investigation?
Absolutely not. That's completely made up.
Can I just get this on the record then? Did you tell your staff in 2016 that Mayor Duggan was close with the Obama White House and a potential Hillary Clinton cabinet member or other senior post in the Clinton administration?
No, Senator.
I'm glad to have that on the record. Thank you. Come back to you, Commissioner Crenshaw. You dissented from the SEC's approval of Grayscale's spot Bitcoin ETF application, despite the fact that a federal court had struck down the SEC's prior disapproval. Do you continue to disagree with the SEC's approval of Bitcoin ETFs?
Senator, to approve an ETP, you have to make a public interest finding on each individual one. To the degree that the commission votes, and we have only voted on that one, Senator, and to make that public interest finding, you look at the facts in front of you, and given the significant fraud in the underlying spot markets globally, given the opacity.
Well, the court looked at the facts, and they struck it down. I've just been deeply disturbed by the posture that the commission and specifically yourself have taken with hostility toward the crypto industry. This is a critical industry in terms of innovation and technology in our country, and I hate to see it being pushed overseas. Commissioner Goldsmith Romero, I'm going to come back to you now. The current FDIC chairman grossly mishandled the auctions of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, two of the largest bank failures in U.S. history. Where do you think the biggest risks are right now within the banking system?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I think we need to look at, we still have this commercial real estate risk that is happening, particularly related to offices and after the pandemic, and also multifamily homes. So I think that's a major risk we have to look at. I think we also just need to continue to think about interest rate risk and how banks should manage that. So those are some of the areas.
Real quickly, FDIC leadership heavily cited the requirements of the least cost test as an excuse for the fact that these auctions failed. What role did the least cost test play in the failed auctions in your view?
Yeah, so I'm just looking at it from the outside, Senator, just like you are. And so I don't know.
Actually, I'm not looking at it from the outside. I saw what happened. And the least cost rule is an excuse because it was misapplied. It's got to be fixed. The person that's going to come in and lead this agency can't learn on the job. You need to know how it needs to be addressed, because what we did here, what the commission did, was expose the system to massive risk. It just should have never happened this way. How would you fix it?
Yeah, so I understand the least cost test. What I was saying from the outside is I can't see sort of specifically how it was applied and how they came up with those numbers. That's something that's been raised by a number of senators and would be one of the top things I would go in to try to dig behind and try to figure out what is going on.
I hope that before you're confirmed, you will work with us to come up with an approach to this, because again, you could get the call on day one when you walk in the office that there's another bank failure. We can't let this situation repeat itself. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Warnock of Georgia is recognized.
Thank you so very much, Chair Brown, and thank you to all of the nominees for your commitment to serve. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to Commissioner Kristin Johnson, who hails from the great state of Georgia, where she has served as a law professor at Emory University. Congratulations, Commissioner Johnson, and congratulations to your family. As we've discussed in this committee, systemic and cultural issues have plagued the FDIC in recent years. It's clear that senior leadership of the FDIC turned a blind eye to ongoing discrimination, harassment, and abuse. And they failed to properly reprimand or terminate offenders. Simply, the FDIC failed to institute a culture of accountability, and as a result, employee morale is low, which has deep implications for the mission. Ms. Goldsmith Romero, thank you for visiting with me yesterday. I enjoyed our conversation in my office to discuss your plans for the FDIC. if you are confirmed as its next chair. I appreciated your candor. The task you face, as you well recognize, is monumental. This is tough work. The FDIC plays a critical role in ensuring the safety and the soundness of our financial system, and it needs an energized workforce in order to do that. What experience do you have changing organizational cultures, and how do you plan to draw on that experience at the FDIC?
Thank you, Senator. I very much enjoyed our conversation in your office and talking through these are tough issues. So I came into SIGTARP, and it was primarily a law enforcement office. It was male dominated. It was special agents who I have a great regard for, and because they put their lives on the line. But I would say sometimes the level of professionalism, the language, and all of that was not at the level that I thought was appropriate, particularly for an IG's office. And so one of the things I came in and did was sort of raise very high this level of respect and this level of professionalism, this level of dignity by which we would treat each other, but also how we would refer to those we were investigating and anyone that we were coming in contact with. And so that organizational change and being able to do that and bring people along with that, so they didn't fight me on it, but that they actually embraced it and moved in that direction, I think I would bring to the FDIC.
And as you expressed yesterday and expressed today, it seemed it was just part of the culture, and people, this is just how it is.
Yeah, I think cultures can change, and I think you start with the tone at the top and what's acceptable, and you send clear messages as to what's acceptable and what's not.
The Cleary report made 7 recommendations for the FDIC, ranging from protecting victims, improving policies, and holding leadership accountable for inaction. When Chair Grunberg came in front of the Banking Committee in May, he agreed to provide a written update and briefing to my subcommittee on the status of these recommendations. Ms. Goldsmith Romero, what is your sense of where the FDIC is in implementing these recommendations?
Senator, it's hard for me to see on the outside, although I read some of the things that are happening on the website, but I'm very committed to being transparent with you and communicating with you as part of your chair of the subcommittee.
Well, yeah, as I made it clear to him in no uncertain terms that as chair of consumer protection and financial institutions, I would hold him accountable and would hold anyone in that position accountable for cultural and structural changes needed. And I look forward to supporting your nomination and holding you accountable to turning the FDIC around. Certainly you bring the kind of experience that we need at just this particular moment. Since I've got a little bit more time, a common theme in the postmortems of the bank failures last spring was that there was a brain drain at the FDIC that led to a lack of seasoned and competent bank examiners, which helped prevent issues from being caught early. At the time, this was attributed to low pay and difficult working conditions. We now know that the FDIC failed to protect junior employees, particularly women and people of color, from harassment and retaliation, and failed to punish the wrongdoers. How will you ensure examiners feel empowered while also working to recruit, to retain, and support examiners, specifically examiners who are women and people of color?
Thank you for that, Senator. So first, we gotta make sure that they feel safe. We gotta make sure there's a good process that they trust, that they can raise these complaints, and then we have to empower examiners in other ways that allow them to be nimble, that allow them to use their judgment and their expertise and experience. And I do want to be able to recruit to deal with this issue of the workforce and how long some of them been, and we need to bring more in.
Thank you so much. I think all of this underscores the ways in which these issues that we're raising around the culture, around accountability, abuse, harassment, that these aren't extraneous to the mission. They are central to the ability of FDIC to carry out its mission for employee morale, for folks to remain focused on the work that we require them to do, need them to do in order to protect our financial system. So thank you again for offering yourselves up for service, and I look forward to supporting your nomination.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. Senator Britt of Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Brown. Welcome to all of the people here and your families. I saw that so many of you brought your families, so we are so glad that y'all are here today as well. So I want to start, thank you so much for coming by. Enjoyed being able to have a conversation. I want to start where my colleague from Georgia left off. He is exactly right. We have got to go back to instilling confidence in the FDIC. It was created in 1933 so that Americans did have confidence in that. And I think the FDIC has lost its way and has forgotten what its core mission is. So just want to associate myself with those comments and saying we want our best and brightest working at the SEC. We want that to be the place they want to work. That's ultimately going to be what helps us maintain the stability of our financial institutions and also ensure Americans are confident that their hard-earned taxpayer dollars are protected. So, Mrs. Goldsmith, Romero, we discussed yesterday, I am incredibly concerned, obviously, that as the FDIC has strayed from its primary core purpose and mission, it's become an agency that is overly involved in controversial rulemaking and has become politicized in many ways in its decision-making process rather than actually following that core mission. And on that, I wanted to get your thoughts on if we see another failure like we saw last year. You know, let's say a bank similar in scale to SVB were to fail, how would you approach that resolution process?
Thank you, Senator. I very much enjoyed our conversation in your office and appreciate your commitment to making sure that the FDIC thrives in its mission. So I dealt with a lot of failed banks while at SIGTARP, and these things happen fast. So I think the first thing you need to do is to ensure that the FDIC is looking at pockets of risk in a very proactive way, data analytics way, and that we also understand connections, and then we figure out what needs to happen. First thing you need to do is sort of figure out what you're going to do with the bank in terms of a resolution. When you walk in, is there going to be an auction? Is that just going to be wound down? How do you keep deposits
Yeah, and on
safe?
the auction, let's say there's going to be an auction. Would you allow an open bidding process where all banks can, or financial institutions can be a part of that?
I think we'd want to bring all the bidders in to try to get the best result.
All interested parties should have that opportunity. And in what circumstance would you decide to liquidate, rather than auction off the bank, private sector?
It's tough. It's tough in terms of liquidation. You want to make sure that the deposits are safe. That's sort of the number one thing with the deposit insurance fund. You also want to look at those assets and say if there's going to be a loss to deposit insurance fund, you want to see if there's assets to sell. So sometimes, though, there's going to be a liquidation.
Well, let's say that it is a bidding process, how do you decide which offer to accept?
Well, I think we have to follow the least cost test, which is laid out by Congress, and then we'd follow all the standards that are in that, and we'd follow all the rules.
So under that scenario, would you commit to accepting the highest bidder, the highest bidder that comes to you?
Yeah, I think you'd have to go into the very specifics. I think that's what you're looking for, right? You're looking for the highest bidder because you want the least cost to the deposit insurance fund.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the objective here. The objective is not about playing politics. It's not about whether or not we want a big bank to get bigger or whether we want someone in this market. It is what is best for the American people. It is to ensure that, we don't want to have to dip into the diff at $20 billion. I mean, to me, Chair Gruenberg did a poor job and chose to play politics, and the American people paid the price. And it is your job or his job, not only as, the secondary supervisor, but also in his role at the FDIC to ensure that these things don't happen. And when they do, though, it's not time to take a look and figure out what people on this committee may want you to do. You have to do what is best for the American people. So I'm glad to hear you say that you will do that as well. In taking a step back, obviously there was poor internal risk management, and regulators clearly failed to do their job before the banks failed. There were numerous red flags that were missed. We've talked about that over and over again. Would you characterize, though, what happened as a capital or a liquidity issue with SVB?
I think it's a failure in risk management and then a failure in supervision.
And then capital or liquidity?
So I think the issue of liquidity becomes really important when a bank is going down, because short-term liquidity dries up so fast, and so then they can't continue. And then when you couple that with the bank runs, that's where you get into trouble.
Okay, and last, I have a few, I think it was most definitely liquidity, but a couple of, lastly, do you think that 2155, the long-term debt proposal that is before you currently, or before FDIC currently, that it is properly adhering to the tailoring requirements in 2155?
Thank you, Senator. I've seen your letter, which is pretty complex, and and I'm still looking at the long-term debt proposal, and I want to look at the comments.
Okay, and that's fair. Let me ask you this then.
Sure.
Do you agree, Chair Powell mentioned earlier this week that 2155 applies to all rulemaking out of your agency? Do you agree?
100%. It's the law of the land.
Thank you.
Senator Butler from California is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Brown. I want to join my colleagues in just congratulating all of you for being nominated, celebrating your families for their sacrifices, for you all to achieve the level of success that has landed you at this table as a nomination of the President of the United States. It is no small feat, and it definitely takes the whole team. So thank you all for doing it. Ms. Goldsmith Romero, thank you, Commissioner, for spending a little bit of time with me and my team extensively going through your credentials, experience, preparation, background. As has already been stated, you know, this taking on the role of FDIC chair in this moment is no small task. And the Gottlieb report is quite substantive, in my opinion, and raises real concerns, not just about the culture of supervision and personnel policies at FDIC, but a real crisis in leadership. And so I want to ask just a very specific question. I feel like I was clear with Mr. Ruenberg about the requirement to not just have a plan that sits on a shelf or a report that is nice that everyone reads when it's in the Wall Street Journal, but something that, but the leadership that is required to actually execute and turn things around. So a very simple question. What are the first 3 things that you will do if you are confirmed?
Thank you, Senator. Very much appreciated our discussion. So the first thing I would do is send a clear message that harassment, discrimination, retaliation will not be tolerated. That includes putting a system in place that it has an EEO process that employees could trust. Having everyone encourage employees to use that so that management can see that. I think we would be doing investigations, conducting investigations, bringing accountability. I think a number of things described in the report warrants removals. And then I'd change this litigation adverse culture so that it's not kick the can down the road or move things around, but you address it right away.
Thank you for the specific response. It's consistent very much with ideas that you shared with our team yesterday, and similar to Senator Warnock. I think this committee, through his subcommittee, but I do believe broadly through the leadership of our chair, is committed to being fully connected to the plan that is moving forward, and applying appropriate levels of accountability from the seats in which we sit, to be able to assist as much as possible, as much as is required, but I think most importantly, to be able to help to do our part to restore confidence with the employees at the FDIC and the work that you are going to be asked to do if you were confirmed. Mr. Ito, it was a pleasure to spend time with you yesterday, and your leadership on the island of Hawaii has just, I think, goes underappreciated as an insurance commissioner and just a public servant committed to the state. And it just was a great time talking with you and learning about your work and your perspective and what you would like to bring to FSOC if you were if you were confirmed, just a quick question. And I wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to get your voice on the record here. We talked a good deal about local economies and the property insurance, the rising costs for consumers, and the concerns that insurers and bad years that insurers are having relative to climate impacts. I'd love for you to talk about how you believe FSOC and relevant government agencies, including insurance commissioners, should capture climate risk data, and how we could measure the potential economic losses from the insurance market.
Well, first of all, Senator, I enjoyed our conversation the other day. With respect to getting data, the NAIC and FILE at the present time are collecting data on homeowners. Specifically, it's called the Property and Casualty Market Intelligence Data Call that NAIC and FILE are working through, and I'm glad that they are cooperating. I think this is a good first step in collecting data and identifying what stresses are occurring in the property and casualty market throughout the country. It is also, I believe, really a good first step in analyzing the data. If I'm confirmed, that's something I really want to get into, and really analyzing and assessing what's happening in the entire United States marketplace on the property and casualty, and the impact that's occurring not only to insurers on financial solvency, but I think more importantly in terms of what's happening to the people who are the policyholders are purchasing those policies. And being currently, I can attest for Hawaii, there's quite a bit of homeowners, condo owners that are really being financially stressed because of the catastrophic losses, the unfortunate event that happened in Maui, as well as the very hard market that we're in right at the present time.
Thanks, Senator Butler. Senator Lummis from Wyoming is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Goldsmith Romero, I'll start with you. Welcome. Thank you for coming to my office, and our conversation was very helpful. Should banks be able to hold the assets of digital asset companies?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciated our conversation too. Banks do hold custody of digital assets right now.
And do you support that?
Yes, I mean, I'm very familiar with banks holding custody of those assets, and it's another business like any other business.
Should banks be able to provide services to digital asset companies like payment services?
Yeah, I don't think it's the FDIC's role to tell banks what industries or companies they should be providing services to.
No, I appreciate your answer, because otherwise we end up with concentration risk, regardless of whether we're talking about digital assets or oil and gas or any other banked industry. So I appreciate that. What's your action plan, the specific steps you would take to solve the management crisis that's going on at the FDIC?
Thanks, Senator. And I know you care a lot about this, and we talked about this. And I talked about how the report reads like a bygone error, particularly for women and minorities and people in the LGBTQ community. It's going to take a lot. If confirmed, I'll give you my sort of top line thoughts. Modernize the federal workplace, put in the best practices of federal workplace that I'm used to and what I've led. I want to herald those employees who are doing the right thing and the managers who are doing the right thing. I would send a clear message that harassment, discrimination, retaliation is not allowed. That includes bringing accountability, investigations, and disciplinary proceedings. Put in place the right process that I'm used to seeing for EEO, and encourage people to use it rather than have them live in fear. Change this litigation adverse culture, which just moves the problem around or kicks the can down the road, and address it right away. The error of each office being a fiefdom would end. It would not be 70 plus FDICs. It'd be one FDIC, just like I did at SIGTARP with one SIGTARP. And then, we talked about, I've some plans I'm thinking about on that hotel.
Thank you, and I thank you for your willingness to address it right away. I think it does need immediate attention. So thank you. Mr. Ito, welcome. Do you support implementation of the International Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures?
Senator, thank you for the question. At the present time, I'm not a member of SOC. It's an issue that I would like to, learn more about or question and what that is, and I'll be glad to meet with you and your staff.
Good. I would like to meet with you about that. I'm a little bit concerned about taking away from the ability of states to do what's best in their local markets. And your Hawaiian market's very different from mine in the state of Wyoming. And I want to make sure that states' markets are tailored to the needs of those states. And tell me about your advocacy for states.
Yeah, so Senator, as being really a state regulator for almost in 5 days, there'll be 31 years.
You're the commissioner's commissioner, aren't you?
I've been there and been through many different changes. State-based regulation, I think, has done an excellent job. My fellow state regulators, what we do in terms of monitoring and protecting the insurance market as well as consumers. As you noted, each state has its own unique risks. I mean, Hawaii, we have on catastrophe, we have volcano, tsunamis, hurricane,
absolutely.
and wildfires. And every state is different.
Yeah.
So there is a uniqueness in the states, and as I mentioned, really, all my fellow commissioners, superintendents have done an excellent job, and will continue to do so.
So one more question for you. The primary function of the council is to identify risks to financial stability, correct?
Yes.
So what do you consider to be the top risk to financial stability?
Well, as FSOC has identified in their 2023 annual report, there's a number of risks that could pose a threat to the financial stability. For me, one of the risks that Hawaii is living through right now is really on catastrophic risks and climate risks. The Maui wildfire resulted in $3.2 billion in insured losses. It has made the Hawaii market even harder. Tragically, there was a loss of 102 lives in Lahaina.
Yeah.
And so with respect to climate risks, in the last 4 years in the U.S., there's been 20, or on average, about 20 catastrophic losses over $1 billion. Total loss of about 4 consecutive years of $100 billion in reinsurance loss. So that is an emergent risk that FSOC has identified. If I'm confirmed, that is one area that I would be interested in really further analyzing what's happening with the property and casualty market and the stresses it's putting on the financial system.
Thank you, Mr. Ito. My time is up. I do have a question for you, Ms. Johnson, but I will submit it for the record and would kindly ask for your written response. Thank you. Thank you all for your willingness to be considered for one of these appointments. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Lemmons, for your thoughtful questions. And I think Mr. Ito's response tells you the devastating impact of our unwillingness and ability in this body to do as much as we should addressing climate issues. But thank you for laying that out in insurance terms. Ms. Johnson, last question I'm going to have, and then we'll adjourn. We continue to see significant risk to our financial system. We experienced 3 of the largest bank failures in U.S. history after depositors lost confidence, withdrew their money at an unprecedented rate, as you remember. If confirmed, you'd have the critical job of identifying and protecting our financial system from these risks to ensure that hardworking Americans can keep their money and their jobs. Ms. Johnson, what do you see as the most prominent risk to our financial system, and how would you go about understanding and addressing them?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. As was referenced earlier, for the Department of Treasury, FSOC has outlined a number of vulnerabilities to financial services markets. These risks, as outlined, and as I mentioned in my opening statement, some of them are endogenous, some are exogenous, some are emerging risks that we've not yet had sufficient opportunity to effectively explore. I think among the risks that are most prevalent in the moment, we've discussed the climate risk and its potential impact on financial markets. I think cyber preparedness also presents as a significant question. And in fact, in the Treasury Department, within the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Financial Institutions, a very recent report that looks at the intersectionality of cyber and AI effectively begins us down the road of a conversation to think carefully about how to address these concerns. I think you noted rightly with respect to SVB and SB, Signature Bank and their failures, not only risk management losses and general concerns regarding liquidity, but very expressly the accelerated manner during which runs occurred at these banks, particularly with respect to communications over social media and the technology to facilitate expedient withdrawals, even over weekends, creates a need for us to think carefully about how we've integrated technology into the banking sector and how we rightfully will be able to protect the banking sector going forward in the context of crises and concerns like those we saw in March 2023. If confirmed, I would be grateful for the opportunity to work directly with your office and to engage with others on this committee with respect to those risks and others that you might identify.
As we will, absolutely. Thank you to the four of you for being here. Thank you for your testimony and your concise, good answers to questions. I hope we can work together as a committee to move forward quickly in today's nominees. I emphasized how three of you have been in front of this and have had major big confirmation votes, close to unanimity in some cases. For senators who wish to submit questions, for the record, these are due at 5 p.m. Monday, the 15th of July. To the nominees, we'd like to have your responses on Friday, July 19th by 5 p.m. So we need these more quickly than sometimes, so we hope to move as quickly as possible on all this. Thank you for your testimonies, the four of you today. The committee's adjourned.